Good evening, everyone. Welcome to today's joint subcommittee meeting of the subcommittees of Diversity, Equity, Inclusion, and Justice and Policy. Our first agenda item, I'll go to you, Val, will be for the DEIJ subcommittee. Go ahead.
Moving the June 12th joint minutes, the June 12th, 2023 joint policy and DEIJ subcommittee minutes. Has everybody had a chance to review those? Okay. I see. Stephen, are you making a motion to approve?
Sure, I'll make a motion to approve.
Natalie, are you seconding it?
I'm seconding it, but I wasn't yet part of the committee, so I wasn't going to abstain from the vote.
We can't vote on them then because we don't have a quorum without you.
I mean,
Well, we can still have a majority.
yeah, I can abstain and I can vote and abstain from the
Right, but I'm not sure that 2 is a majority of a 4-person subcommittee.
who
No,
was
but
also
3 is.
subcommittee at the time.
3. We need 3. Mariah is not here today.
Isn't Andy on DEIJ?
No.
I was then, but I'm not now. However, Mariah is in the attendees, so if you
Oh, she is.
promote her,
Okay.
yeah.
Wait for Mariah. Welcome, Mariah.
Hi.
We're just voting on the June 12th, 2023 minutes for the joint meeting of DEIJ and policy.
Oh yeah, I'll second or whatever. I was here
Okay.
for the thing. I just
Okay, great.
yeah.
Stephen, your vote?
Yes.
Mariah?
Yes.
Natalia?
Abstain.
And then I vote yes. Okay, thank you.
All right, so now we'll move to approval of the October 16th, 2023 policy subcommittee minutes. Would someone like to move them?
I'll move that.
Thank you, Stephen. Is that a second, Valerie?
Yes.
Your vote, Stephen?
Yes.
Valerie?
Yes.
Andy?
Yes.
And I also vote yes. So now we will move to a discussion and possible vote on inclusion in the life of the school activities policy. Betsy, could you put up the latest draft up on the screen?
Sure.
Thank you.
Can everyone see it okay?
Not really. Can you make it bigger? Thank you.
All right, so as you can see on the first page, we still have the change we made at the last meeting, which was to explicitly spell out that we're including out-of-district students in participation of their life of the school activities. You can scroll down, Betsy. All right, now this section here, limits on student rights for extracurricular activities. We had stated at the last meeting that we would check with legal counsel on what exactly is the status in terms of the obligations that befall private third parties. And the answer I received is that it's complex. And where it's complex is that it depends on the nature of the relationship between the private entity and the public school district. So for example, if there is mutuality in terms of funding, where you have a commingling of funds, sort of like we have with Steps for Success, then there would be an obligation on the schools to ensure that students have the accommodations. If it's a program that solely is renting space from the school district and otherwise has absolutely nothing to do with the schools, then the third party would be, it's on the third party to provide accommodations if we are going to force them to. And then there are all sorts of relationships in between. So there's a complex test essentially to determine the sufficiency of the relationship between the school district and the private party. So as a way to cut through all of that, you continue to scroll down a little bit, Betsy.
Mhm.
I decided to keep in the language about we're going to require a third-party provider to provide a written plan for how they intend to comply with the ADA. I also added at the recommendation of our Special Education Council that all contracts to be negotiated with PSB partners include a non-discrimination clause that allows us to terminate a contract based on the failure of that third party to comply with ADA obligations. Now, we have the option to either provide the accommodations ourselves to the third-party provider that is not considered to be in sufficient contact with the school district, or we can require that of them as a condition for contracting with them, which I think was something that we all value, because we want to make sure that our students are included in the life of the school activities, regardless as to whether it's school-sponsored, only partially school-sponsored, or something that's with a totally private entity but takes place on school grounds. Stephen, I see you have a question.
Yeah, so was your intention, David, that the written plan, the fulfillment of their written plan for how they intend to comply with the ADA, would that be, would the fulfillment of that plan mean that we could not terminate them for any failure to comply with ADA obligations?
No, we certainly could. It's an and. So the next sentence, all contracts shall include a non-discrimination clause that allows a district to terminate a contract. That would apply to any contract we have with anybody running a program for our students. So that would be in every contract. That's irrespective of what the written plan says. I'm envisioning the written plan more as where the program explains whether they're going to cover the accommodations or whether they expect us to cover the accommodations, just so that it's very clear delineation of where the responsibility lies. Mariah?
Thanks. So I apologize because I didn't read this in advance and I'm just coming to it, but I have a couple of questions. One is, why does it reference ADA and not reference IDEA? Why did you delete out IDEA, I guess, in this whole part? I guess I'm confused too, because like, just let me keep going on this. Like, ADA may have some overlap with people's IEPs, but it may also not. And so I'm confused why we're only referencing ADA in here.
We could reference both. I was going along with suggested language from council, but we could put both. I actually would like this policy to be more encompassing than just ADA and 504s. And I have a little bit of language addressing that. That's on the next page.
Okay.
I do think section 504 of the Rehab Act is really important here as well, right? So.
Yeah, I mean, to me, this feels really narrow right now in a way that our earlier conversation, and this is like, again, with me just skimming it right now, but, and so I want to, but I guess our earlier conversation, our conversation last time, I thought was much more about a spirit of inclusion. And I guess I'm a little bit thrown off by what I see here, which I don't think goes along with that same spirit, but maybe I just need to read it more closely and understand some of the intention. The other comment I specifically want to make is on the idea that the contract, that we're going to leave it up in the air whether each program decides to, whether they think PSB is going to take care of it or whether we should. That to me just seems ripe for confusion, and I think that we need to be much more clear on, I think we need to be the one who's leading the dance, and what we want to see happen is what we need to write there, and have them propose the plan to me asks for a lot of back and forth, where we might have a very strong sense, we should have a very strong sense of what needs to happen, and we should be the one defining how that gets implemented, not asking for what could be a very small nonprofit to figure out how to handle this. Even
All
if
right,
it's
so
us imposing our expectations, it still needs to be, I think, us making those expectations clear.
All right, so as to your first point, the next page is more encompassing in terms of who would be covered by this policy. To your second point, I was looking at it more from the perspective of we may not want to treat every third-party vendor alike, depending on what the program is. There might be some programs that we want to be obligated to provide accommodations and others that we might want the programs to be obligated. I'm not sure that we can place them all in the same bucket, depending on the financing of it or the scope of the program. But I'm certainly amenable to making that change, but I'd want to hear from the district whether they would
Well,
prefer us to be prescriptive or not.
But David, I guess my point is not that we have to treat them all the same. My point is that we should be the ones defining how they're treated, not asking them to propose a plan to us. We should, no matter what kind of a program they are, we should be defining what the program supports should look like.
All right, Valerie?
Oh, I'm just not sure how we would do that, Mariah, if they're all individualized, right? Like, so I have a sort of question on how we would do that, but I also, David, have some concern about some of these entities that maybe run an 8-week program. How is this enforced in an 8-week program if they're not able to get, I don't know, whatever it is that's needed, someone to help them with either it's a one-to-one or like, are they supposed to be able to have that ready to hire? Like, I'm sort of unclear on how something like a summer program or an after-school program that doesn't run for an entire school year, how that would be enforced and how they would, as a small nonprofit, be doing that. And, you know, could they just kick the can essentially for the entirety of the program to the detriment of the student?
Well, we would have that non-discrimination clause that allows us to terminate the program if they're not complying.
Right,
And
but it doesn't allow that student any kind of remedy in real time. Right? That's
We
my
could always-
concern.
Well, we could always step in and provide that remedy ourselves and then battle the third party later on about who pays for it. So I think that would always be an option if that's something that we would want to elect to do or even include it in policy. In terms of setting up the accommodations with enough lead time, I think that just depends on when the contract gets negotiated, but we could spell that out more clearly. Andy?
Yeah, thanks. My question, I think, has been touched on already, both by Mariah and by Val. So for a given case, how do we, or who determines and by what process, what is a fair and appropriate accommodation? Because in the case of an IEP, that's the result of a formalized process with a lot of input from a lot of parties. So how do we run that, or how do we expect a third party provider to run that for an after school program, say?
I think that's a good point. We probably do want to spell out who's making this decision, what's considered appropriate. Any thoughts on that?
Well, I think I'd like to hear from Lisa if we can on this. I don't feel like we're the experts on how you make these determinations without that team, like Andy mentioned, without sort of experts in the field, whatever the issue is.
Do we have Lisa on?
I'm sorry, I had my mute button.
Okay.
Would it be all right to just go through the whole policy so that I could envision it in its entirety with? I meant, there's more beyond it? Is there more beyond what we've discussed?
No, not really. The end here is just about notification.
Okay. I think Andy has certainly, and Val and Mariah have spoken to it. We would have to approach it on an individual case-by-case basis in terms of the need for the specific student, whether it's a 504 accommodation or a special education accommodation. I do think there would be a challenge potentially in staffing a program that was 8 weeks long. But we would still have to approach it on an individual basis.
How is it handled currently?
Exactly that way. We have, well, would a scenario potentially help? We have a student in an out-of-district placement, very interested in track and field. One of the possible opportunities outside of school is Dream Far, which takes place in Brookline, but is actually coordinated through the Newton Public Schools. And so we convened a team and partnered with the Dream Far staff to look at the individual accommodations that the student needed. And we also ended up facilitating in partnership with the family, but facilitating the additional support that the student needed to participate. So it's just very individualized, case by case, in partnership with the third party entity providing the activity.
All right. Natalia?
Just have a question about that case by case. How do, and sorry, I'm sort of newer to, like, I'm still struggling to understand, and the scenario was helpful. How do parents know to approach you to support with this? Because it sounds like it was quite a involved process. Would parents know that they have that option for a third party sort of provider?
Well, we have tried to enhance our communications with all of our families, and particularly those in out-of-district schools, about non-academic and extracurricular opportunities. I think when we first discussed this life of the school policy, we talked about potentially sharing out on a broader level our commitment to students being able to access the richness of a Brookline education. So I think there is probably additional ways to share out. But in my second year, I actually receive a fair number of very direct phone calls saying, my child is interested in flag football at FRR, and how do I sign up, or how do I make that happen, or track and field, or unified sports. So there's a level of collaboration that has evolved over time as well.
So can I just ask a follow-up on your Dream Far example? So as far as I know, they don't use any space of ours and are outside. That's so I guess I'm hoping you give an example of something that's in our buildings. So like an after-school program. So
Sure.
say the Lawrence after-school program offers an 8-week program on, I don't know what, I'll make it up, ceramics. How does that work? Right. So it's run, say, by a third party, but they're in Lawrence, and I'm making this up. I have no idea. They advertise in the PTO newsletter, but it's a separate entity, facilitated maybe by the PTO. How do we do that? Right. Say it's, again, like it's my other example. It's an 8-week session, once a week or twice a week.
I would have to think that through, right, in terms of convening a team to look at the needs of the specific student wanting to participate in ceramics. I can speak to flag football as an activity at FRR, where what the student needed was the student was able to participate without additional support, but transportation was an issue. In that particular situation, we did end up making a decision to fund the transportation so that the student could participate. The Lawrence with the ceramics, I think, again, we would individualize it, but it is complex in terms of, you know, if the Office for Student Services is facilitating the hiring of additional personnel for an 8-week after school class, certainly there are challenges, you know, while we all have the same commitment, certainly there are challenges potentially in terms of staffing.
Mariah?
Thanks. So, I just want to go back to what's written in the policy. And we talked originally a lot. I think part of the reason that this policy came up was the issue that extended days had raised, which was the uneven provision of support staff for students who needed it during extended day, during the extended day period. And how some of them were able to access support and some of them weren't. And I'm hoping for some sort of clarity around what PSB's policy is. And I'm wondering, David, if you can clarify where here that's addressed. And again, I need to apologize because I was like traveling and I'm jet lagged. And so I know I've gotten this now, I've had it for 20 minutes, but my brain cannot process it very well with all the strikeouts. So I'm just wondering if you could help me understand where that is.
Well, are you asking specifically about students who are on IEPs and 504s? That's very directly addressed, or are you talking about pretty much any student?
No, I'm talking about, let's say, a student, the issue that the extended days raised were students who need additional support during the afternoon. Let's say a student who has some sort of, you know, we'll say a shared aid or a one-to-one aid during the day. What is the stance of PSB towards providing those services as like if they're needed for, let's say, a social as opposed to an academic reason in their IEP? How is it determined if the extended day is going to have that support or if they're going to need to pay for someone themselves to provide that support?
So I do think that ties back to Andy's question. We do need to add who's making the decision about what is the minimum level support required. And the reason why I say minimum is there is a section that addresses being able to go above minimum, but somebody needs to establish what's the minimum to be in compliance with ADA, with 504, with the Rehab Act, IDEA, et cetera. And once that's done, whether it's PSB directly or the third party partner, which I think we should leave up to each contract since no two third parties are necessarily the same in terms of the relationship, it's going to be covered. I think that's the goal here. And we can be explicit about that. One way or another, the support's going to be there, whether PSB is providing it or the third party is providing it.
But who's paying for it? Providing
Again,
it versus paying for it.
so
That's what I'm trying to understand.
That would depend upon the contract. Sometimes it'll be PSB, sometimes it'll be the third party. I think that depends on what the program is. Also,
So
it depends.
but are we talking about treating classes of programs the same? For example, we have all the extended days as a sort of, I think they're called preferred partner already in our documents. In some of our other documents, like, are we talking about at least treating them all the same?
We could, if you want to go to that level of detail. I was leaving it broad on purpose because I'm not sure that any of us know the intricate details of every contract. And so I worry a little bit about being too prescriptive on what needs to be contained in the contracts beyond what legal counsel recommended about having a non-discrimination termination clause. But we could be more specific if you think that's something that would be valuable.
Well, I guess my big issue is, and I'm not sure I see it yet, is, and again, I need to read this more. What would change if we were to vote this policy? If nothing changes particularly, then I'm not sure it's very valuable. So
changes
having
is-
broad statements about stuff that don't necessarily result in action is what makes me feel a bit,
What changes
frustrated.
is that all third parties would have to provide a written plan to us describing how they're going to comply with the ADA, and I'll put in again, IDEA in section 504, and that in addition to that, all of our contracts, no matter with whom, will have a non-discrimination termination clause. So if they are not abiding by ADA, we will terminate the contract. So that would change immediately. There's language there saying that's effective as soon as we vote this policy in.
so when you talk about the contract, you're talking about, for example, an extended day leases the space. You're going to put the non-discrimination in their space lease.
We could do it that way, yes.
And some of these after-school programs do not have space leases. Some of them are just using, and the PTOs don't have space leases.
We have agreements with everybody, presumably, and to the extent that we do not have an agreement, we really ought to, and this language says that we will have a contract with them. So as soon as this.
In that case, I think it's important too that I guess I'm worried too about this idea of we're setting up this contract with this like penalty. Oh, we're going to break the contract with you. When what we really want to have happen is kids to get the services they need to access the support, not to start breaking, like telling the PTO they can't use the building anymore. So I guess I don't want the contract terms to have like such a negative outcome, which isn't the negative outcome we actually want, right? Like we're incentivizing outcomes, which I feel like aren't the goal we want.
Well, nothing would preclude us from filling the gap if the third party provider is not, and we could still terminate on them because they were not complying. The program would continue, but that creates a disincentive for partners to not comply with ADA because obviously they receive money from.
Not necessarily though, David. I think like, for example, the Lawrence School activities, if I'm not mistaken, and I could be, but some of those at least are volunteer, completely volunteer run. Like they might be formally 501c3s, and like the same thing is true with the PTOs, right? Like no one is actually making money off of this. And so like, I think it sets them up for a whole bunch of complication, as opposed, and we'll say like legal structure and contracts and so forth, when at the end of the day, what we really want to do is just be able to have kids have the support they need.
So are you
And if we're gonna
suggesting?
Go ahead.
Are you suggesting that we just as a district say we'll provide the supports?
I think that we need to figure out how to make sure that kids get the supports they need. I think that there's a lot of, I'll say, gray area programs like the 8 weeks that Val mentioned, these short programs. It makes it very difficult to figure out staffing for some of them, if that's the accommodation that's needed. But I still think that we should be thinking about that we should be designing a policy that meets our goal of having kids get supports, as opposed to building in layers of like bureaucracy and contractual like relationships, which ultimately mean that either the programs aren't going to run because they're concerned about the contractual implications, or they can't abide by them. Maybe they can't generate a plan. I just think that like there's a lot of disincentivizing as opposed to structuring this in a way that kids get support. So your question is sort of broad of, do I think that the district should just provide them? If I had to say yes or no, I would say yes.
I mean, I guess my follow on to that, David, is are we not venturing into procedure with some of this? And maybe we leave it to Lisa to figure out whether she wants to have that third party vendor be on the hook, or whether the district is going to be the one who takes responsibility for finding, again, if it's staffing or if it's something else, materials in an alternate, presented in an alternate way. I'm
I agree with
wondering if
you,
we're venturing
Valerie.
too far into procedure. Sorry, David.
No, it's fine. I agree with you, Val. That's why I wrote it in this manner, so that that's subject to the contract and whatever gets negotiated. But I hear what Mariah is saying, that she wants there to be some guarantee that the supports are provided. It's not just good enough that we can cancel the program. That's not helping kids either if we're just canceling it. So
No,
I
I'm not suggesting that we cancel it. I'm suggesting
But-
that we take some of this out and that we leave it up to Lisa to figure out whether she negotiates with them in a certain way, or but that the kids get what they need, right? That our students get what they need, and whether that's PSB providing it, whether Lisa has a great relationship with this provider and they're able to do that support. But that's sort of left to how it's implemented and not what we necessarily put in policy.
Okay.
Can I add on to that a little bit? In my mind, and I'd love to hear what Lisa thinks about this. The way it sort of should be is that PSB wants the students to be able to participate in these things. That's sometimes easier and sometimes harder, and that families or caregivers can like basically communicate with the district about the activities, kind of like sort of just writing down what Lisa has said has worked really well so far, which is basically people reach out to say, I would like my student to participate in X, and I think they need Y to do that. And the PSB basically evaluates it and says, like, you know, yes, and here is how we're going to try and make it happen. And I think that maybe it doesn't necessarily obligate the district, but it lets staff know if the policy is written this way, that the school committee supports this, that this is our stance, is that we are in favor of this sort of thing. And it allows them to provide those supports as appropriate for the individual case. And that way we're not wading into the details of contracts and everything else. We're really saying to staff, as Val just said, figure this out however you need to, but we want you to provide these supports that are necessary, and just leave it at that. Is that something we could do, David? And also Lisa, does
We
that
could. It's just in terms of actionable items, I worry a little bit about how that would be a change on what we do now. Obviously, we would be guaranteeing that any program that takes place on school grounds or involves school activities would have those supports, and that would be an improvement. But if that's all we say and there are no tangible manifestations of it, I worry a little bit about that. Stephen?
I just want to make sure I understand this conversation well enough. So it sounds like Mariah and Val, what you're agreed on is that the policy objective is maximal inclusion in the life of the school. And your concern is the policy as written may not achieve that objective. And it may in fact do the opposite, it may throw a wrench in achieving that objective. Is that correct so far? So I guess two things then. One is I would want to ask Lisa first, is there a specific strategy towards achieving that policy that you see as the likeliest way to move forward? Is it a contractual mechanism? Is it a contractual incentive or disincentive that can be written into policy? That's question number one. And question number two, if it isn't a contractual mechanism, is there another strategy, without veering too far into the procedural, I feel like that's what you're going to remind me, Val, that can be a part of this policy? I'm looking at you, Lisa.
Are you?
Yeah.
Sorry about that.
Okay.
I think I understand your question is, does OSS specifically need a contractual mechanism written into the policy to ensure that private companies and third-party providers meet their obligation?
Yeah, if our policy objective is maximal inclusion in the life of the school, is there more that we should do as a school committee to help achieve that objective other than to say that's our value to OSS? Is there more that we should provide to you as guidelines to achieving that objective?
Well, when I look at this piece, to me, this is probably more procedural rather than policy. Am I saying that I haven't faced challenges with private companies and third-party providers willingly accepting our students with unique needs? I have. And you know, we approach it similarly to a mediation, you know, a negotiation when we face those situations and try to get to a place of yes, always with the goal of the student being able to participate, you know. And yes, it's a challenge at times, but that's what we do, you know. We do it individually and in partnership. There is no question that third-party providers and private companies have an obligation by law to provide what a student needs who signs up, but we know that there are sometimes challenges with that. But it still strikes me that this piece is procedural, but that's just my own opinion, and I'm not an attorney, so I defer to Attorney Perlman and others on that.
I mean, we were advised, sorry, go ahead.
We're in OSS, we're going to approach every situation on an individual case-by-case basis and try and make a distinction between, you know, enrichment and service delivery and the role that a parent guardian might play, always with the goal of having the student participate.
So David, would you want to consider revising this to state something like the policy of PSB is maximal inclusion of students in the life of the school, and PSB is authorized to use one or several of many mechanisms to achieve this objective, including this incentive, and perhaps having a list of strategies that we would support in, or is that also Val veering too far into the procedural? I'm imagining this something like the sustainability policy, where there was a list of illustrative strategies that could be undertaken in support of the achievement of an objective.
I think that's something we could certainly do. My one worry, though, again, is I want to make sure there's some kind of tangible manifestation of the policy, because if it's just stating a value, we have that value now, and yet we have some problems that we're trying to resolve. So I'm not sure that simply restating what it is that we want is sufficient. I agree that we don't need to go into this degree of detail, that's venturing into the procedural, but I'd like there to be something tangible that we can look at to offer reassurance that it's actually happening. Mariah?
On that note, then I'll go back to the extended days. I mean, can we be specific and talk about extended days as it's unlike many other programs in that it's needed by parents to actually work, by many parents to actually work. And so can we be very specific on our intention to have, for example, extended days and PSB OSS share information, the extended days share information with OSS, and then there's an evaluation on which students may need additional supports to participate fully in extended day. And that would be very specific. It would address a need that is critical for the working adults, and also for the extended days. And it's those programs are different than, I mean, enrichment by its very term, it's enrichment. It's not necessary. A program that runs 8 weeks for an hour is not the same thing as a work day program.
All right, I like that. Natalia, I saw you had your hand up.
All I was gonna say is basically when Liza said that there are issues sometimes that come up in terms of convincing a third party to what policy would be helpful to go back and say, well, the PSB policy is very clear on XYZ. Like, and I take your point, Mariah, that, if it's volunteer parents, maybe they wouldn't use that as a threat, but is there a way that there can be a policy? And maybe it's what Stephen was saying, that one of the options is to discontinue a contract, at least that it's there as an option in the case by case, if the school district is feeling that the third party provider has the means and is choosing, I don't know. Anyways, this is beyond I'm not a lawyer. So just thinking kind of what would be helpful to the school in negotiations is one approach of like, do we have a policy that works for them too?
All right, so I'll work on another draft for our next meeting. I've taken notes on your input. I do want us to be able to move on to our next item because ideally we would get to our last substantive agenda item by about 5:55 because there's somebody who has to go at 6 and wants to be able to speak at least a little bit. So why don't we go ahead and move on to presentation and discussion of equity policy staff, recruitment and retention, outcome measurement and reporting requirements. Val, go, your turn.
Thank you. So Claire, correct me if I'm wrong, but a policy was due to us on the 31st, DEIJ on the 31st of October that we passed last year on staffing and retention of our staff of color. We didn't receive that report on the 31st, and I'm wondering if you can give an update on when we might be receiving that. I think she's here. Saw her here before.
I think you're
I
on
think
mute,
she's
Claire.
yeah, she's trying to unmute.
Unmute. There we
I'm
go.
sorry, I totally lost you for just a moment.
Oh, I was just saying that last year we received our first report on the hiring and retention of staff of color, and that you had indicated that you weren't able to provide that by October 31st per the policies. So I was hoping you'd give us an update on the status of that report and when we might be able to review it.
So I apologize. I don't believe that I reported that I couldn't report that. I think that was coming from Office of our Human Resource Office.
I think you were on that as well, but in any case, so do you have the report?
I can share what we have thus far. There's something that we're still working on. If I could share my screen. Let's- So it's not letting me share, but I guess I can start off first just by saying is that right now, we do not have a mechanism, an accurate mechanism of really identifying our BIPOC staff currently. With all the transition that's happened in our HR department, right now, we don't have accurate data. What we have been able to use, we've used the DESI data, which actually has not been that helpful, given that between DESI and what we have here in Aspen, there are two different data sets, which makes it very, very difficult. I want to preface that, what I find something that we're going to have to wrestle with is that people have different ways of identifying themselves. There's a cultural piece that goes along with that. Oftentimes people identify as race and sometimes people identifying as ethnicity. And what's happening, what we see is there's a difference in what we see on the DESI side and what we have internally. I'm not sure if this came up last year at all, but that's definitely something that myself and Susan have run into this year. Susan has not been able to provide an accurate data as to what we have thus far.
Did Janae not leave behind how she gathered her numbers?
Pardon me?
Did Janae not leave behind how she gathered her numbers?
She did not. The only assumption I can use is that she did some kind of cross data connection between DESI and Aspen. Currently, what we have in Aspen is not accurate. So the direction that I'm thinking we need to go in is definitely collaborating with the BEU and having a collaboration working group to then move forward in trying to collect that data. We have to be really careful in collecting that data. So it's important that we have a collaboration with that.
And it's
Right
beyond
now,
the BU, right? Because we're looking at central admin, we're looking at non-aligned as well. So not
yes,
just-
absolutely. And which we can give you the non-aligned. I think we'd be able to collect that because I think all of us would voluntarily give that data. I think the issue is that when you go in to, when we're onboarding, there's a particular feature. People can either determine if they want to identify or not. Not everybody determines what that they want to identify. And I think that's something that we also have to, that we're going to have to grapple with, which is why we're going to need some support with that.
Betsy, can you allow for screen sharing for Claire?
Claire, you should have it. Let me see if I can help you.
This says you cannot, so I'm not sure what's happening. I think it's because the other screen is still up. At least on my side, I can still see the document. There we go. That might.
I should have thought of that. You're absolutely right, Claire.
All right. Hold on just a moment. So we can go right here. So this is currently the data that we have from DESI from 2022 to 2023. And what's challenging is you can see that the fields that they have, what we have in-house has more fields than what is provided by DESI. What's also quite difficult in that this has multi-race, non-Hispanic. In other areas, we have multiple forms of ways of identifying as Hispanic, which is also making.
Can I ask a clarifying question?
Sure.
If is Lisa still on? So we do this, right? I mean, we have to reconcile this every time we do MCAS, every time we do something with
Absolutely.
for our special ed. So we must have a district-wide way of handling this. Do we not?
Lisa just, I think she jumped off. So yes, and that's, and this is something that we talked about today. It's not the same as DESI, and it's not necessarily accurate. So that's the tricky part. And that's what we're trying to
Go
reconcile.
ahead, Lisa. Claire, Lisa is here.
Okay.
Hi. When I presented last April of 23 around disproportionality, this is one of the identified areas that was problematic is DESI's categorization versus PSB's categorization. And so we narrowed the scope to make it more consistent with DESI data, but still from a human resources perspective, there was still a great deal of work to be done to reconcile this demographic data. So I don't see it as sort of fixed, so to speak. This is something where the Human Resources Office, the Department of Equity, and OSS needs to make some determinations about our internal data so that we can accurately reflect the race and ethnicity of our staff and students. So it is not fixed.
No, it's not. And I think we really have to get to a place of where there's a collaboration so people have a will to want to identify. Because it seems that there's definitely something amiss in that area. So even with what we have here with what DESI is reporting at the end of 2023, we can't say 100% that this is accurate because of how people identify themselves. Now, I know that Susan plans on, as she is staffing up and hiring a talent acquisition person, there'll be some more planning. We're looking at the spring to have a better roadmap of what that's going to look like. With our collaboration, there's some efforts that OEE is taking to kind of work towards increasing BIPOC staff. But in regards to actually having an accurate number, I think we're still, like Lisa said, it's not fixed and it's something that we're still working on.
So could you give us an example? So I guess I'm not seeing it on the slide. I see African-American 111.4 for us. And this is, you said this is DESI data or this is our data?
This is DESI data.
Okay, so what is our number for African-Americans in the district right now? I'm trying to understand the size of the problem and how far off we are.
Hold on just a moment. I'm gonna have to stop sharing. I apologize. It's not letting me switch to the next slide.
While you do that,
Blair, while you're pulling that up, I could just give a little context. Is that okay?
That's great. Everyone, this is Christina Hernandez, our new Assistant Director of Educational Equity. I'm going to try to see if it'll let me share again. Could you go right ahead, Christina?
So while Claire's doing that, I'll just give you a little bit more context for the data. So when it pulls up again, that chart that we were just looking at, there's the two columns. The one on the left is the district data. So that's from the DESI 2022-2023 accountability report that takes us to the district. The column on the right are the state numbers, but also on our end with an eye towards how we are doing hiring, retention, and recruitment efforts most intentionally and in the most equitable way. We've also looked at the breakdown of that data by school, by each specific school within PSB. So we have those numbers as well, and we're looking at those because we understand that it's not enough to just get more BIPOC educators in the building, that those educators and those hiring decisions need to be made with an eye towards what is the student body makeup of this school specifically, and what are the needs of each specific school. Also, when that data gets pulled up again, one thing to note is that is general staff data. So that's covering everyone from a paraprofessional staff to school principal staff. It's covering everybody, which I think that's something we're very conscious of when looking at that data and determining who is actually in front of our kids daily, and who are the educators that our kids are seeing as well. Those are some things that we're thinking about with that data. The next slide that you'll see when it gets pulled up is our student demographic breakdown for the district as well, so that we can compare what does our staff actually look like versus what does our student population look like? And again, that's something that we're looking at district-wide, yes, but I think we're also very focused on what does that look like per individual school. And we have that data from DESE as well, which we know it's not perfect, but it's the starting point that we have right now.
Can I stop you there first, Christina?
Yes.
So
Yes.
I completely appreciate that and value that OEE is going to do that breakdown and get us that information eventually. But I don't want the perfect to be the enemy of the good. What the policy requires is that district-wide data based on October 15 numbers, right? I mean, I know, and I appreciate that the work that you're doing to drill down because we need to look at that. But in terms of us having a snapshot, it's a snapshot as of October 15 with the categories that are laid out in the policy. And so we sort of purposefully, at least for our first pass, made it something that we thought and that, Janae at the time and HR at the time thought was attainable in the time frame given in the policy. They were very involved in the development of that policy and in the what we were asking for. They thought was manageable in that time frame. So I guess I don't want it to be an either or. I want it to be an and. And so I guess the question is, right, when can we get the what is required in the policy? And then certainly we want to continue having these conversations about that building specific data.
Can you see it now?
Now it's back up, Claire.
Okay, thank you. I'm sorry. So, and Christina, she explained that so well. I think the other thing that we just need to keep in mind, again, this is still DESE data. The data that we were able to find here in district is this data. And this is teachers, paras, support staff, and certified support staff. This is via Aspen. But again, my concern is that, in talking to our building leaders, they don't believe this is very accurate. So yes, I totally agree. This is something that we have to reconcile and we have to figure out how to do that. Based on talking to the building leaders, it seems like this is something that we can do in a working group with the support of our BEU to kind of get people to really go in and clean up their the Aspen data and come out with a cleaner look at what our demographics actually look like. I also think we need to look at, I need to collaborate more with Susan to determine what it's going to look like when we're onboarding people, so that people are actually identifying who they are. I don't hear anyone. Are you still there?
We're here.
Okay. It's this, there's a break. I apologize. There's a delay.
Also, there's just one thing I wanted to say. I know that we had discussed that the data that you all are looking for may be a little bit different, but I did want to name, so this isn't just a snapshot you see on this slideshow to not see again for a while. All this data from DESE, the general report, the individual school breakdown, all of that lives on our website as well for transparency with the community and with you all.
All right, looks like there's maybe one more slide.
So what we wanted to share with you as well, let me put this, I apologize, let me put this to slideshow. What we also wanted to share with you is some of the efforts that we have taken. BEAD has already been established, the Brookline Educators for Educator Diversity. We want to re-share that slide with folks. I know they've been involved with a lot of the work that Janae did prior to my arrival, and as well as HR. I want to really share our partnership that we have, a Massachusetts Partnership for Diversity in Education, MPDE. This is a partnership that PSB has had for some time. They are very much committed to hiring and retention of BIPOC staff. They have a new initiative that they have with Dr. Saren Daly, which is the MPDE BIPOC Retention Fellowship. So in this particular fellowship, it will be a network of the participating districts who are part of MPDE, where they will be creating a space for folks to come to. Again, like it says here, center the experiences of BIPOC staff, create collective spaces, that rejuvenation and support that folks need as they return to their districts. There is going to be an inaugural cohort of 30 fellows. We've had several applicants from Brookline who've applied, so we're waiting to hear back to see if they get into that particular cohort. This is some of the impact. We were really pleased when we had the Building Bridges conference, how many people were really excited about the network of the really large network of people of color that they would be able to communicate with, and really build that affinity space and really share professional goals and be able to come together and then return to their district, possibly providing professional development for folks who have not been able to participate in the cohort, but really excited about the potential of being part of that. We also have the potential of partnering with the Teachers Lounge. The Teachers Lounge is a great organization that really focuses on, really, as it says here in the vision, to drive the unprecedented student outcomes by greatly diversifying the people, thoughts, and actions of educational workforce in the greater Boston area and beyond. Their mission is about recruit, revitalize, and retain. They have a great program called Classroom Leaders of Color, the Clock Fellowship, where they really focus on early career. It's a 2-year cohort model. They use various tools and resources and support to really increase the input and impact and income of folks who are participating in their on Zoom, sorry, who are participating in the cohort. I'll stop there for now. Are there any questions at all?
Andy?
Yeah, thank you. So I think in writing this policy and passing it last year, part of the intention was that if current district practices don't lead to us gathering the kind of data that we need, then we need to figure out how those practices ought to be changing, right? So that's one piece. So I guess it seems to me that two things do need to happen this year. One is that the policy needs to be complied with. So even if we're not currently gathering the best data, we should at least report the data that we have with the caveats that go with it. And then number two, there needs to be some shared understanding of how we need to change our practices so that next year the data that we gather are more meaningful and are more in line with sort of the intent of the policy. So what do you think are realistic dates for each of those two pieces? So one is, just to comply with what was already supposed to have happened in October, even if the data aren't the best. And two, when can we have the discussion of how we change our onboarding practices, how we change our reporting practices so that we do get what we need going forward?
Well, I would be happy to try and get that data to you within the next couple of weeks of what we have. Again, with the caveat that we're not 100% thinking that it's accurate. I know we were waiting for the October 1st report to be ratified. I will double check with Lisa and the data, not the data office, but Tam's office to see whether or not it has been, and kind of work from that and make sure we get you something. And then also really try to discuss, what does it look like with onboarding? I mean, I think everyone knows that our HR department is still going through transition. We have 2 temps that are working with us. So there's some practices that still need to be implemented that are not, that, we're still working through. And I'm more than happy to collaborate with OAF in those efforts. I know from OEE's perspective, we are trying to build relationships with other organizations so we can increase, and we can also work on retention. To make sure that we supply people with the tools that they need to feel as though they want to stay in those districts that they're in, but specifically for us to stay in Brookline.
I wonder if it's worth docketing a discussion for an upcoming subcommittee meeting, just to make sure that the changes that you're thinking of are the ones that would allow the school committee, I think, to be informed the way that it wants to be informed.
Exactly. I would love to be able to do that. I know we haven't had an opportunity to meet until today.
Mhm.
So it would be great to be able to sit down as a committee and kind of unpack some things.
I think there are two things then, Claire. I think if you can get the subcommittee, the report, as imperfect as it may be, by mid-December, that would be fantastic. And then we'll docket a meeting for early January to
That'd be
discuss that and discuss what you're thinking about in terms of changes.
And I just want to second what Andy said. I think it's important for us to be accountable to our own policies, even if it's with imperfect data. So thanks, Claire, for, we realize that there's been a lot of turnover. And also welcome, Christina. It's nice to meet you in a subcommittee meeting.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Thank you both. We have a very packed agenda. I think that unless any other subcommittee members have questions, that we can move on to our next agenda item. And thank you both. Thank you, Christina. Thank you, Claire, for being here.
Absolutely. Thank you so much.
Forward to working with you both.
All righty.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.
All right, so next up, we have a discussion on the definition of anti-Semitism. And to begin that, Betsy, if you could promote Scott Gladstone and Rob Lykind.
All right, they're coming over.
Hey everyone. Oh, there's Rob. Rob is he's going to be attending a joint event of a bunch of
He's here.
organizations celebrating.
Scott.
Oh yeah, I'm just started introducing Jews of color, and so but he is here for now, which is great. And he's the executive director of the New England chapter of American Jewish Committee. Rob, why don't you go ahead? You're on mute. Still on mute.
Let me try that again. Thank you all for this opportunity. We appreciate the opportunity. We want to talk about something called the IHRA, Working Definition of Anti-Semitism. IHRA stands for International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance, which is a international organization based in Europe that was founded to preserve the memory of the Holocaust and deal with issues of anti-Semitism in Europe. So let me give a little background. The IHRA definition is just that, it's a definition. People often have a lot of questions about it. So let me use this opportunity to try to explain what it is, how it works, why some people worry about it, and why they're wrong to worry about it. By sharing four observations. The first one is, may seem evident at this stage, but that anti-Semitism is a very, very real problem in the eyes of American Jews. Each year, the American Jewish Committee does a survey of American Jewish opinion. And one of the things that we find consistently is that roughly 90% of American Jews now consider anti-Semitism to be a very serious or somewhat serious problem. 82% believe that anti-Semitism has steadily increased in the last 5 years. 40% changed their behavior in public to avoid the threat of anti-Semitism. That means change the way they dress, change things that they wear, change places that they go to. And 26% say that they've been targeted by anti-Semitism in the last year. What's important is these perceptions have been validated by multiple sources. The FBI annual survey of hate crimes shows that more than 50% of all religiously based hate crimes are directed against Jews. 9% of all hate crimes in the United States that are recorded by the FBI are directed against Jews, and the total hate crime tally, although Jews constitute only 2% of the American population. This data is confirmed by data from the ADL, which shows a consistent trend with numbers going up year and year in their annual survey of anti-Semitic incidents. We also have seen in the last several years a proliferation of events which are anecdotal, but also notable, such as where celebrities, for example, are involved in events that are anti-Semitic, people ranging from Elon Musk to Kanye West. What's important to recognize that in the background of all of this is another piece of data that comes out of the AJC survey, and that also has been consistent over several years. And that is that roughly a third of Americans don't understand what anti-Semitism is or have never heard of the word before. And that brings me to my second point. To address anti-Semitism, we need to understand what it is and how to recognize it. This problem first became public in Europe after 9/11. There was a outbreak of violent anti-Semitism that struck many countries in Europe, and also this resurgence of anti-Semitic social movements. In Europe, with its history, this led to sort of a sense of urgency about what do we do about this? And there was a problem that became evident very quickly. That judges, policymakers, law enforcement didn't know what makes something
Hello?
anti-Semitic.
Yes,
And as a result,
yes,
when
yes, everyone is. It's going to be after these speakers right now.
Sorry,
You
Betsy,
are
you're
Betsy.
unmuted,
to public
Betsy.
speakers.
Sorry,
Thank you.
please go on, Rob.
Yeah, so hang right on there and you'll see.
Sorry,
what-
Betsy, you're not on mute right now.
Very sorry about that.
There was a problem there, and what that led to is a process that lasted more than a decade to try to come up with a mechanism to define what makes something anti-Semitism. How do you know? How do you recognize it? And the end product was something called the IHRA Working Definition of Anti-Semitism. Since it was adopted by the IHRA in 2016, it has been endorsed by 41 countries, the European Parliament, the Secretary Generals of the United Nations, and the Organization of American States, the Obama, Trump, and Biden administrations, scores of states, municipalities, and NGOs in the United States and around the world. And this gets me to my third observation. The IHRA has achieved such broad acceptance because it is a simple and effective tool to help people understand what anti-Semitism is and learn how to fight it when they see it. The definition has three parts, and this part is important to appreciate. The first is what is called the definition, and it's really quite innocuous. It says that anti-Semitism is a certain perception of Jews which may be expressed as hatred towards Jews. Rhetorical and physical manifestations of anti-Semitism are directed towards Jewish or non-Jewish individuals and or property, towards Jewish community, institutions, religious facilities. That's the definition. I will say candidly, it doesn't do much for me. It is a very limited definition, but what gives this device force is two things. Number one, a certain explanations of how to view things. So, for example, it says that criticism of Israel is not by definition anti-Semitic. And it also says that the definition doesn't tell you what is anti-Semitism. It tells you what could be anti-Semitism. In other words, it is not just a standard definition, which is trying to define every factor in what is anti-Semitic. Let me explain to you how it works. It operates a lot like WebMD. If you imagine in WebMD, your big toe hurts, and you go and you look it up, go to WebMD, and it says, you have a broken bone, you sprained it, or maybe you have gout. WebMD doesn't tell you you have gout. It says you have a symptom of what could be gout or a variety of other things. That's exactly what this thing does. It presents symptoms, because the third part of the definition is a list of symptoms of things that could be anti-Semitic. So, for example, It could be anti-Semitic to justify or aid in the killing or harming of Jews. Doesn't mean it inherently. There may have been many reasons that you killed or harmed that person besides anti-Semitism, but sometimes those acts are associated with anti-Semitism. Denying the genocide of the Jewish people in World War II could be anti-Semitism. Some people would insist that it is anti-Semitism, but the definition actually doesn't do that. It doesn't say that anything per se is anti-Semitism. It presents you with symptoms. Applying double standards that hold the Jews or the Jewish state to standards not applied to other people or nations is a symptom of what could be anti-Semitism. So what you have is something that functions as more of a resource, an educational resource that provides guideposts for what could be anti-Semitism. And then the definition does something very important. It says, if you see some of these symptoms and you think that this may be a case of anti-Semitism, you should look at all the circumstances before making a judgment. In other words, this definition is a tool, it's a resource to help people who may not understand what could be anti-Semitic to recognize some of the symptoms so that they can evaluate the circumstances around them. Now, this gets me to the fourth observation, which is people who oppose the IHRA definition, and many who support it also, get what it's saying wrong. People think that because Israel is mentioned, let me step back. The arguments, the principal arguments that are made against the IHRA definition, and you should be aware of that if the Brookline schools are considering endorsing it, is number one, that it stifles free speech. It is a complaint that I don't really understand because this is a simple educational resource. It has no capacity to stifle free speech. It has no capacity to prevent people from saying or thinking what they does. People may not want to hear certain points of view, but it's not because of this definition. This definition actually helps generate discussion about difficult subjects. The second is that it will stifle criticism of Israel because people will fear being called anti-Semitic because the definition alludes to certain matters concerning Israel. So, for example, denying Israel's right to exist could be anti-Semitic. What's important to note here is the definition doesn't say that it's anti-Semitic, quite the contrary, so it could be. But what it is identifying the fact is that sometimes that is a symptom. We see that today very clearly where some people who are protesting Israel are saying you should kill Jews. The possibility that that's associated with anti-Semitism, I think, is hard to avoid. So this is a very limited device. Now, some people also identify the fact that there are two other definitions that are concerned.
Wait, but Rob, before you get to that, I'm actually getting some questions. So and maybe you could address some stuff that I know is of interest. I think Steve in particular wants to hear about the other definitions, but also in this context, could you, and there's other speakers and stuff, can we talk about how the definition does or doesn't interact with state and federal law, in addition to talking about the other definitions?
This definition.
All right. Oh, sorry.
is-
Before we go on, David, does this meeting go till 6:30 or does this meeting go beyond then?
We can go a bit over, but hopefully not too far over.
This definition is an educational device. It's intended as an educational device. It's intended as a resource to help people understand how to think about, how to talk about what could be anti-Semitic. There are some who say that they want to codify these, the definition. It's not something that we endorse. And there are only a few jurisdictions that I'm aware of where that has happened, but we don't think that's a good idea. We don't think that's a proper use of the definition. We think in a school system, if you have a definition like this, It enables a teacher, a administrator, to start to have a framework for thinking about and understanding what this is. And very importantly, it's not only has widespread support around the world, but it has widespread support from the Jewish community. 51 of 53 members of the Conference of Presidents of Jewish Organizations, which is an umbrella for Jewish organizations around the United States, endorsed this definition.
So we want to have some time for questions that we can field, Rob. Do you want to hit like for 30 seconds the other definitions?
Yeah, I was about to say that there are some other definitions. Most importantly, you have the Jerusalem definition and the Nexus definition. These definitions were created by mostly by academics to try to define included definitions that would offer greater protection to people who are critical of Israel. The IRA definition creates conversation. It doesn't preempt people introducing these definitions into a discussion. What it does do is create a standard that no other definition does, a international standard for beginning to understand and talk about anti-Semitism, something for which I can tell you people in the Jewish community feel that there's a dire need for today. So let me stop there because I understand time is limited.
All right, we do have some other speakers that we're going to get to, but thank you for that presentation. Scott, was there anything further that you wanted to add? And then we'll move on to those who signed up.
I not to add, maybe at the end a quick word, and again, I'd like to be available for questions.
All right, then why don't we move to our speakers now? And our first speaker is Gina Crandall. Betsy, if you can promote Ms. Crandall.
All right, she's joining us now. Ms. Crandall, you need to unmute yourself and turn on your camera if you'd like.
Sorry, I'm Gina Crandall, 117 Stedman Street. A month ago, Brookline News published a letter I wrote to thank Superintendent Guillory for his letter to the Brookline school community, which addressed his students' grief from daily escalating violences in the Israeli-Palestine crisis. I was surprised that he had been pressured by some Israelis, Jews, town meeting members, and Representative Vitolo to apologize for not emphasizing Jewish grief. Now the school committee is being asked to adopt the IHRA working definition of anti-Semitism. Anti-Semitism is a serious threat, but it is already addressed under existing civil rights laws as religious or race discrimination. The ADL, which is frequently cited by journalists documenting rising anti-Semitism, includes recent protests by Jewish Voice for Peace, and if not now, activists as anti-Semitic. How could Jews be anti-Semitic? The answer is a political project that began in the 1990s when Israel and its advocates redefined anti-Semitism to include all criticism of the state of Israel, resulting in the IHRA redefinition. They do so to silence Palestinian rights activists. That's the reason the school committee has been approached about the IHRA definition at this time. The legally incoherent and non-binding IHRA definition is widely disputed. The lead author, Kenneth Stern, argues that it was drafted to collect data and urges against its use as a policy. The ACLU, the Center for Constitutional Rights, the American Bar Association, and Palestine Legal all call it a threat to free speech. More than 100 civil society groups, including Human Rights Watch and Amnesty International, urged the UN not to adopt it. More than 300 scholars many of whom are Jewish, have rejected the IRA redefinition. The American Association of University Professors condemned it as a threat to academic freedom. I urge you not to silence the speech of students and teachers by adopting the IHRA redefinition in school policy. Thank you.
All right, we will now go to our next speaker, Ms. Susan Etzkovitz.
Hi. Oh, no picture. Let's see.
We can hear you though.
Oh, really? I unmuted.
We can hear you and see you now.
Okay. Okay. Hi, my name is Susan Etzkovitz. I am a Jewish resident of Brookline, Massachusetts, 61 Longwood Ave. And my colleague and friend, Gina Crandell, spoke very eloquently and talked about some of the things I would like to say as well. But mostly I want to acknowledge that anti-Semitism is alive and well, and that we have to do everything possible to dismantle it and confront it. However, it is not the same thing as criticizing the state of Israel, which is the definition, as Rob said, it appears innocuous, but it isn't innocuous. 7 of the 11 examples of anti-Semitism have to do with criticizing the state of Israel. And that is against the freedom to speak. We must be able to criticize governments when they're not doing, when we feel they're not doing the correct thing for human rights. It's just basic principles. We criticize the United States, and we should be able to criticize Israel, which is not even our country. And the definition is deceptive. It's a wolf in sheep's clothing, excuse me. It appears to be benign, but it isn't. And it's dangerous and damaging and disputed, as Gina Crandell said. So many organizations, Jewish organizations, have come out against this definition. It should not be part of any school program, committee, or unless we're going to also include anti-Islamophobia. I mean, I was at a town meeting the other night, and we heard from the several members of the Muslim community in Brookline who said they felt unsafe. They're scared. They don't feel they're protected in Brookline. Why don't we have something that protects their rights? And then there's Hindus. Why don't we have Hindophobia definitions or homophobia definitions? Why are we singling out anti-Semitism? It is part of right-wing hatred, as well as all these other isms. And as I think you asked about state law, Massachusetts state law 151B encompasses all religious creeds. There's no need to single out anti-Semitism or Jews. All people, all religions are protected in Massachusetts General Law 151B and 151C and Mass General Law 272. So it's all there. Why do we have to go out of our way to adapt something in any capacity that is detrimental to freedom of speech and to single out one kind of hatred over another? It all stinks. And we should watch out for it and stand up for the rights of human beings, all of us, all human beings. I guess that's all I have to say. Thank you.
All right, next up, we have Ms. Yael Alkali.
Can you hear me?
You can?
Great, thank you. Dear school committee, I'm a deeply concerned parent, and today I bring forth a petition initiated by Brooklyn parents, a collective plea to mandate Brooklyn Public Schools to endorse the IHRA definition of anti-Semitism. To date, over 600 individuals have signed this petition. Again, over 600 individuals have signed this petition. This list includes Brooklyn residents and individuals with personal or professional ties to our schools and community, including school staff and alumni. The petition reads as follows: mandate Brooklyn Public School to endorse the IHRA definition of anti-Semitism. We, concerned residents of Brookline, MA, are deeply troubled by the alarming rise of anti-Semitism within our Brooklyn public schools. The International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance has presented a clear definition of anti-Semitism endorsed by the US in 2019 and by Massachusetts in 2023. It is time for the Brooklyn Public School Committee to take decisive action by endorsing the IHRA definition. This endorsement will boldly declare that hatred and discrimination have no place in our schools or community. By embracing this globally recognized definition, we empower educators with clear guidance to identify and address instances of anti-Semitic behavior, fostering an environment where all students can learn without fear. Please join us in urging the Brooklyn Public School Committee to endorse this definition of anti-Semitism. These 600 signatures collected in a very short time frame reflect a united front amplifying the sentiments of deeply concerned residents. It's a loud and clear call for action. People can convey their concerns through alarming statements such as a Brooklyn residents, we need to promote a safe space for our Jewish students. To stop anti-Semitism, it must be clearly defined and understood. The Brooklyn Public School Committee must take decisive action against the alarming rise of anti-Semitism by endorsing this definition. Jews no longer feel safe as anti-Semitism is on the rise. Never again. It is tragic that I have to write this, but you need to protect Jews in Brookline. And there are unfortunately many more statements like this. This is all public. You can review it also online. And following this committee today, I will also share with you all the signatures as well as the petition. Dear school committee, we urge you to listen to the voices of the community you represent, to endorse this definition of anti-Semitism. Take action, address this crucial initiative to ensure our school and community are a safe place for all, including for the Jewish community and students. Never again is now. Thank you.
All right, next we will be going to Sana Haroon.
Hello, my name is Sana Haroon. I am a professor of history and I live in Precinct 6 in Brookline. I've had 2 children at the public schools of Brookline, and I have 3 concerns regarding the adoption of the IHRA definition of anti-Semitism that I wish to share with you. The first is puzzlement. Brookline already has policies that protect and nurture each student's values and reinforce community in our schools. Our students are encouraged to identify intersections of power and positionality, and they are told to strive for respect, dialogue, and collaboration. The second is concern for the integrity of the curriculum. Is it to be censored to conform to the IHRA objectives for the proper representation of Israel? Are Brookline High School students and teachers to be sanctioned for referring to contested Israeli state policies in classes such as world history or racial justice or global leadership? And what about during activities such as Model UN? This is a dangerous precedent to set. We cannot shield any of the places that Brookline's diverse people hold sacred from our students' examination of global politics, law, and society. The third is fear. Allegations of anti-Semitism are being used to dox Muslims and people of color at universities around the country. Is the proposal to adopt the IHRA definition a move towards silencing and surveillance of our children? Will the faces, names, and addresses of our students be shared on the internet and projected from mobile units? Adopting this proposal will undermine our teachers' discretion in teaching and in mediating and enabling resolution of conflict. It will lead to censorship of the curriculum, and it will undermine rather than promoting tolerance, respect, restorative justice, and the safety of our students in our schools.
All right, we will now go to Ms. Fauzia Rashid.
Thank you. So I have some prepared comments, but I'm a resident of Brookline. I have a child in the Brookline school system. I unequivocally oppose the IHRA definition of anti-Semitism. I, as previous speakers have noted, am joined by many progressive Jewish organizations in this request. I do want to say thank you to the school committee, and I applaud the fact that the district is taking on the issue of hate and bias head on. I want to personally thank you for the important work that you are doing. There's much learning to do about both anti-Semitism and Islamophobia. However, it's impossible to detail all of the ways in which hate and bias manifest. We can never do this for every single group in Brookline. And we want, and we need, and we have to be inclusive as possible. I oppose any manifestation of hate and bias, but I soundly reject group-based definitions, especially ones that can never be exhaustive or support every group. Massachusetts state laws, education laws, and mass policies already legislate against hate crimes, hate speech, harassment, and bullying on the basis of race, religion, disability, or sexual orientation. In their wisdom, these laws and articles correctly seek to protect all Massachusetts and Brookline citizens equally. These laws are meant to serve all of us. I recognize how important it is for the Jewish community to be able to name things themselves. I do. Anti-Semitism is real. It is, however, unfair to single out any specific definition of anti-Semitism, especially if that definition serves to prevent criticism of a foreign state and its actions and policies. Criticism of any foreign government, even our own government for that matter, is enshrined in our laws and in our democracy. My concern with the IHRA definition is that it is often interpreted to mean that all criticism of the actions of Israel, a foreign state, are inherently anti-Semitic. To have anyone or anything undermine our right to free speech goes against the very fabric of this country. It is something that we, as Americans, should strongly oppose. The protection of our free speech is critical to the survival of our democracy. I want to end by saying that I do obviously unequivocally oppose any IHRA definition of anti-Semitism. Thank you.
All right, we will next go to Isabella Zafour.
Can you hear me all right?
We can, yes.
Awesome. My name is Isabella Gafour. I graduated from BHS in 2019, and I just graduated from Cornell in May. I also unequivocally oppose the IHRA definition of anti-Semitism. I'm going to do my best to shed light on the perspective of students in this matter. Firstly, I'd like to say that the town can establish whatever definition they want, but young people these days do not move around the world in the same way that you might have done when you were our age. I'm betting most of your kids are active on social media. Do not underestimate the unlimited access to content and knowledge your children have just by being active on the internet. In the last month, I've seen an intense shift in social media rhetoric. After the horrible attacks on October 7th, the world offered outpouring love and support for their Jewish brothers and sisters and quickly claimed to stand with Israel. However, as the days went on and Israel began bombing innocent children, women, and families in their homes, hospitals, and refugee camps, people began to start questioning their support for Israel. People, not just in Brookline, but around the whole world, are quickly learning and realizing that standing with Jewish brothers and sisters and standing with Israel do not have to coexist. People who are quick to repost "I stand with Israel" on October 7th are now demanding ceasefire and demanding that the Israeli government immediately stop murdering innocent people. Defining things like anti-Semitism and Islamophobia is a huge challenge, but what I will say is it is absolutely unfair to portray the belief and hope for Palestinian liberation as an attack on Jewish brothers and sisters. And if that is what you do believe, then I want to ask you, if praying and fighting for freedom for Palestinians is anti-Semitic, why isn't supporting the Israeli government's murder and displacement of Palestinian lives Islamophobic? Muslims are tired. We are tired of being accused of anti-Semitism for simply grieving our Palestinian brothers and sisters and praying for their liberation. We, or at least I, will never, and I mean never, apologize for fighting for Palestinian liberation. And remember, your children have access to every single news update, every single piece of information, and they will not go along with definitions you create for them if they don't stand by them themselves. Just look around to Harvard, MIT, Brandeis, Brown, all schools where many students, a lot of them Jewish, have been arrested simply for peacefully denouncing their school support for the Israeli government. Students are energized, strong-willed, and determined, and you are lying to yourself if you truly believe you can censor or control their education with definitions you create for them. Thank you.
All right, we will now go to our next speaker, Mr. Sasan Zelha.
Hello, my name is Sasan Zelha. I'm town meeting member as well as library trustee. I'd like to voice my support in endorsement of IHRA, as both Rob and Scott in detail kind of brought up the definition of IHRA. In no means does it limit free speech. It does not limit criticizing of Israel. As a matter of fact, there are examples given clearly that how criticizing the state of Israel, Israeli government, does not necessarily equate to anti-Semitism. Anti-Semitism has been on rise for the past year, actually for the past couple of years. We had several anti-Semitic incidents at Brookline High. And we need a process and a definition to address this. We need to educate the students as well as the faculties to have a standard definition that distinguish between what is anti-Semitism and what is a true and fair criticism of Israel. For that reason, I hope the panel endorses the definition of IHRA. Again, endorsing it is basically adopting it, educating, and learning about it. This is going to continue, is going to be something that's going to grow over time and something that can be modified. But not having a standard to what anti-Semitism is what's putting a lot of children at risk. Before October 7th, the anti-Semitism in Massachusetts was up by 400%, and today is up to 1,000%. So I hope that the school community, thank you.
David, are you going to leave a few minutes for us to hit some common themes? Because we have heard some common themes here.
So we can do that. And there's also going to be a speaker who's going to be opposing the IHRA definition, who also will want to be a panelist to answer any questions. So we will now go to, we only have a few speakers left. Ms. Lisa Schatz.
David, I need to apologize, but I need to go pretty soon. Are we, like, what time are we going to be done at?
Okay, am I on?
We have a few more speakers, so maybe.
All right, I'm gonna read these. I'm gonna read fast. Thank you very much for letting me speak now, and I want to apologize in advance for the offensive language and the quotes that I will be sharing with you tonight. I'm going to share with you some examples of anti-Semitism among young people right now. 2 million TikTok users viewed Osama bin Laden's letter to America, which states, among other vicious diatribes against Jews, that the creation of Israel is a crime that must be erased. The video lured 1.2 million views in less than 24 hours. Hundreds of users expressed sympathy with the letter and views like, so I read a letter to America, and I will never look at life the same. I will never look at this country the same. Right after the atrocities committed by Hamas on Israelis and before the Israeli assault on Hamas, college students from all over the country demonstrated in support of the atrocities of Hamas. Harvard students put out a petition justifying the assault. Anti-Semitic posts at Harvard include Harvard Hillel was burning in hell, Harvard Hillel is burning in hell, and they got funded by Epstein as well. And a post that read, let him cook, from Harvard received 25 upvotes from Harvard students. A Stanford professor was suspended for forcing Jewish students in 2 of his classes to stand in a corner while he called them colonizers. He also shrugged off the deaths of only 6 million Jews in the Holocaust and called Hamas terrorist freedom fighters. A rabbi who spoke to students said they were less traumatized and dehumanized. A Columbia professor called Hamas massacre of Israeli and American citizens on October 7th awesome and a stunning victory. A Yale professor stated prayers for Palestinians, Israel's murderous, genocidal settler state, and Palestinians have every right to resist the armed struggle. She reacted to the massacre by tweeting, it's been such an extraordinary day. Antifa chants were common at UCLA. UCLA's pro-Palestine protests where pro-Hamas students wore masks to conceal their identities. The chants calling for the murder of the Jewish people were also heard on the campus of the University of Minnesota. Jewish students at Cooper Union in New York City sheltered in the library as pro-Palestinian demonstrators banged on the glass walls of the building. The pro-Palestinian protest near Tulane University, at least 2 students were assaulted in a melee that began when someone tried to burn an Israeli flag. Anonymous posters flooded a Cornell message board with threats, prompting the school's president to alert the FBI. Another threatened to bring an assault rifle to campus and shoot all you kid Jews. So I know there's been a rise in Islamophobia on campus. It's undeniable. A Muslim student was the victim of a hit and run at Stanford, and the driver shouted out a slur before he hit him. And there was a death threat aimed at a Palestinian employee at the American University. But given the history of anti-Semitism through the millennia in Christianity, in Islam, in communism, given the Holocaust, I think this threat now to Jews is exceptional. And I think a good start to address, particularly among young people, might be the adoption of the IHRA definition of anti-Semitism. Thank you very much.
All right, we will now go to Ms. Hajar Delshad.
Sorry, hi, my name is Emma Nash. I want to thank Hajar for sharing her time with me. And I'd also like to apologize for not having very well thought out comments prepared tonight. But I did want to speak because I am a graduate of Brookline High School, the class of 2014, as well as the Florida Ref and Ridley School class of 2010. And I'm here tonight to voice my unequivocal opposition to the IHRA definition of anti-Semitism. I am a Jewish student and I am deeply concerned by the rise in anti-Semitism. However, I find the IHRA definition of anti-Semitism extremely counterproductive to countering anti-Semitism in that it conflates anti-Semitism and criticism of the state of Israel. It is impossible for us to measure the very real incidences of hatred towards Jewish people when we are conflating real incidences of hatred with criticism of the state of Israel. Secondly, I find the IHRA definition of anti-Semitism to be in many ways antithetical to my values as a Jew. One of the things I love about being Jewish, and one of the things I loved about attending Brookline High School, is having the right to question authority, without the right to inquire, to, as I think another speaker said, investigate. I'm mixing up my words. I'm sorry. I get very nervous speaking on Zoom. Another speaker said, if we adopt this definition, can we imagine our students being able to discuss Israeli human rights abuses in Model UN, to debate, to make inquiries? I worry that we can't. And that is antithetical to, as I said, one of the things I love about being Jewish, which is the right to question. Finally, I am concerned that adopting this definition of anti-Semitism would make it impossible for Muslim students and Arab students and Palestinian students, who are already a very small and embattled minority within Brookline High, or rather within the Brookline school system, to be able to narrate their experiences. I worry about even the chilling effect of having to, it's already so frightening to be able to have to see, I get frightened speaking in front of an audience, and I'm not even speaking as a particular minority in Brookline, but it's already so frightening to try to narrate an experience of oppression before a crowd without having to wind your way through the minefield of knowing that even using a word like apartheid could automatically brand you an anti-Semite, which in my opinion, it doesn't. So again, I would like to conclude just by affirming my opposition to the IHRA definition. Thank you.
All right, we will now move to Ms. Ala Eldamati.
Hi, everyone. I hope you're doing well today. Can you hear me okay?
We can.
Okay, great. So my name is Ala Eldamati. I've talked to you guys before, so I won't go into introductions and get right into it. I wanted to start by thanking you all for taking on hate, in a very meaningful way. One of the main reasons that I came to the Brookline Public Schools was because of the diversity. And when you bring together such a diverse group of people, making sure that everyone feels welcome and supported, and combating hate in all its forms is so critical. So I want to thank you for taking time to research that and look into it in a deep way. With that being said, since others have talked specifically about the problems with the IHR, I will not discuss that, but we'll bring up the fact that hate in all its forms is unacceptable, especially when it's against a minority or an ethnic group of, something specific. But if we will talk about trying to define anti-Semitism, which given this moment in time is quite important, I'll say that in this particular moment in time with the Palestinian-Israeli conflict, from all evidence, whether from Jewish sources or Muslim sources or Arab sources, proves that as anti-Semitism rises, so does Islamophobia and anti-Arab hate. And I say anti-Arab hate as a separate category because no one has mentioned that today, and I think it's very, very important. Actually, we'll share a specific story because I do think that at the end of the day, stories make. My story is about my nephew who recently on the T, thankfully not in Brookline just yet, but on the T, wearing his Yankees hat in Boston meant that someone approached him to have a discussion about why he was wearing a Yankees hat, which ultimately led to this person finding out that my very American-looking nephew or Caucasian-looking nephew was Egyptian, and threatened to kill him 3 times in the middle of the conversation. Now, my nephew actually took it quite lightly and never ended up reporting this. But as his essentially, as his only family here in Brookline and in America, I have been so hurt and have been thinking very deeply about that. And you know, I share the personal story because I don't think that our voices are heard enough as Muslims and as Arabs in this community, understandably so, because in a lot of times they don't need to be heard, because the point of Brookline is for all of us to bring our diversity and get together in the things that bring us together, like sports or arts or whatever else it is. And we don't need to lift up our own individual stories. These are just apparent as we get to know people and conversations. And I think that that needs to be still the underlying theme in how we operate within our schools in Brookline. We're for diversity. We're against hate in all its forms. You know, I have a problem with within that identifying specific groups who are vulnerable, like Muslims, Arabs, Jews, you know, and making sure to recognize that anti-Semitism and Islamophobia and anti-Arab hate and, you know, whatever else is needed are important to emphasize, but that they go hand in hand. We can't say one without the other. Thank you for your time, and I hope that you will seriously consider protecting hate. I mean, speaking against hate of all forms hand in hand.
All right, and now we will move to our last speaker, Mr. Arnaud Amzalag.
Okay. Hello, can you hear me?
You can.
Thank you. So, my name is Arnaud Amzalag. I'm a parent in Brookline. I also speak in name of my wife, Sophie Schnapper. We are Jewish and Israeli parents. We have 4 kids in the Brookline school system. And so I would like to speak not in favor of the IHRA definition, and I would like to open by thanking Dr. Guillory for the resources he shared as he heard the parents during the previous school committee and the suggestions that was done to him by parents to adopt Facing History and Ourselves as anti-hate material. If people looked at it, it provides a definition of anti-Semitism, as well as examples of its manifestation, history of anti-Semitism, and how anti-Judaism became racialized Judaism. So I invite people to look at the material that has already been provided now in our school, and I praise that. But however, I do not support that we continue as an institution and a community to promote the IHRA definition in particular. I don't think it's necessary, and actually I think it could be quite counterproductive. I'd like to remind that the Select Board declined to adopt the IHRA definition, and for good reason, because of the problems that this definition carries. It's not me only saying that, and I'd like to add that the other definitions that has been described a bit earlier in this meeting are not just additional definition, you know, to add something here and there. Like the Jerusalem definition has been drafted in response to the IHRA definition because of the issues people had with the definition. And it is signed by 350 academics of Judaism and Holocaust studies. So I'd like to just read a piece of the introduction that's quite talking. So the IHRA definition includes 11 examples of anti-Semitism, 7 of which focus on the state of Israel. While this puts undue emphasis on the one arena, there's a widely left need for clarity on the limits of legitimate political speech and action concerning Zionism, Israel, and Palestine. The aim of the Jerusalem definition is twofold: to strengthen the fight against anti-Semitism by clarifying what it is and how it's manifested. And the second goal is to protect a space for an open debate about the vexed question of the future of Israel-Palestine. I think these two goals are absolutely essential even for my kids, for all of our kids, to preserve a space for open debate, right? So I think this concerns everybody in Brookline that needs to preserve this open debate. And it concerns also, especially us Jews, of course, because we want to fight anti-Semitism together with everybody else and with all the sources of hate that there is. Again, I'm not the only one saying that. Like the Progressive Israeli Network in 2021 spoke also, warned against the problem of this definition, just saying a few Jewish organizations, Amenu, American for Peace Now, Abonim Dror North America, Hashomer Hatzair, Jewish Labor Committee, J Street, New Israel Fund, Partner for Progressive Israel, Reconstructing Judaism and Truah, argues that the effort to enshrine the IHRA definition in US law and policy threatens to conflate legitimate criticism of Israel and advocacy for Palestinian rights with anti-Semitism. They continue and say that the Biden administration should reject facile and oversimplified doctrines that can easily be abused. They should refrain from legislating bans on constitutionally protected speech and legitimate activism, which often wrongfully targets those who harbor no hatred toward Jews, and which make it more difficult to identify and confront genuine instances of anti-Semitism. I think I'll stop here. Just saying, at the previous meetings on the school committee, there was a lot of accusation of anti-Semitism that here and there, and that was not very precise. And I think the fact that the IHRA includes criticism of Israel as a double standard, which is very vague, does not contribute to define anti-Semitism more precisely, but on the opposite, it makes it more vague and more difficult to fight against. And finally, of course, it could. I'm 47-year-old father of 4. You know, I can take accusation of being a self-hating Jew. That's okay. I have a thick skin. But like kids in our school, they don't have that thick skin, especially if they are not Jewish. They could be victim of these accusations. And of course, that's not something we want in our town. So thank you. I'm done for now.
All right. Now, thank you to all our speakers for participating today. We do have, we've already gone past our hard stop. We were actually supposed to end our meeting at 6:30. I will allow very briefly 1 minute if anybody has something urgent that they want to say, and if not, then we really do have to call it a night.
I will offer a brief. I'd like to offer a brief comment. First of all, thank you to everybody. I appreciated the sincerity of the comments that were made. There's a part of me that's a little dismayed. I agree that free speech is sacrosanct. I agree that people need to have the right to criticize Israel, that nobody should feel that their political beliefs that somehow compromised by a definition of any kind. I also think that a lot of what has been claimed about the definition is largely inconsistent with what the definition says. And I will just offer one thought. In the testimony that was offered, there's been a lot of talk about the definition stifling free speech, a lot of definition stifling criticism. Let me just observe that the definition is active in many countries. I'm not familiar with a single instance where someone has said that this definition stifled criticism of Israel. Actually, if you read it carefully, it promotes discussion and protects people and places a burden on people who would claim that it was anti-Semitism to explain why that's true. You just have to read the language. I'm also not familiar, maybe there was, I didn't hear anybody offer it, a single instance where this definition stifled free speech. And I think that's important. I would urge people to go back and read what the definition says. I don't believe it says anything, in many instances, remotely close to what was being alleged.
So, Rob said at the beginning that people misunderstand and misuse the definition, and specifically said that people say that it doesn't allow criticism of Israel. In fact, the only really definitive thing that the definition does say is that criticism of Israel is not anti-Semitic. Half of the country of Israel was marching against the Netanyahu government for the last several months. They were not anti-Semitic. Let me tell you, the thing is, it's easy when anti-Semitism looks like racism, right? We look at Charlottesville, we look at right wing, we look at neo-Nazis, we look at white supremacists, and they're saying all the same dehumanizing things about Black people, brown people, Asian people that they're saying about Jews. That's easy, right? What needs a little bit more exploration is when there are other manifestations, such as conspiracy theories. Many of those conspiracy theories having to do with Jewish people as a collective and are focused on Israel as an avatar for all Jewish people. So one of the earlier speakers had a story. I'll have a quick one. Maybe this is not something that everybody knows, but at Wellesley College, there was a dorm where 3 of the resident advisors sent out a letter soon after October 7th that said, we are very upset about the horrific things that have happened in Israel and Palestine. So that could have gone either way. There is no place for Zionists in our dorm or on this campus. And if you are having trouble with the events in Palestine, then you should come to us as your dorm people. We will help you. So what about the Jewish kids who identify with Israel? What about the Israeli kids? They were erased. What do you do with that? It's not white supremacy, but it certainly could be anti-Semitism, and it needs to be explored. And that's the sort of thing that the IHRA raises that discussion. By the way, the Jerusalem definition and the Nexus definition also talk about these examples. So they're not mutually exclusive in that way at all. They all talk about ways that vicious criticism of Zionism or Israelis or Jews who identify with Israelis, oftentimes, you could say, well, that the Jews control the media, they control the government, whatever. They say the Zionists control the media. I mean, there are manifestations now. This is how Jews are feeling anti-Semitism now. These, again, it doesn't say if you say this, it's anti-Semitism. It says if you say this, we have to look at the context. Who's saying it? It's something to explore. It's a tool. Everybody was saying, well, it's going to shut down speech. You're going to legislate. It's not any of that. It's a tool. Right now, teachers in the high school don't have a tool. They know they're supposed to fight anti-Semitism, but if it doesn't look like racism, is it not anti-Semitism? This is the discussion, and they have no tool.
All right, thank you, Scott. We're going to go to Stephen, and then we're calling it a night. Sorry, because we're going to lose a quorum soon, and some of us have to move on to other meetings and commitments. Stephen, go ahead.
Okay, thanks, David. Let me make 3 quick remarks. One, let me just start by thanking everyone who spoke and saying that for everyone who has loved ones or friends who are in Israel or Gaza right now, or who are experiencing anti-Semitism or Islamophobia or anti-Arab or anti-Muslim hate speech, or who are fearful of it, you have my sympathies. I think this is a sad and difficult time, and I think that I speak for the entire school committee when I say that. I think it's hard to make a lot of the public comments that were made tonight, and it's appreciated. Second, I want to thank you, Scott, for your initial remarks. I think Scott has done a lot for this community in raising awareness of some of the pernicious ways that anti-Semitism has been peddled in curricula across the country, and helped us understand how to be aware of it. So I appreciate that. I also want to say that in preparing for this meeting, I spoke with a lot of people, including the CEO of Teruah, who was an organization that you mentioned, Arnaud, that's critical of the definition of IHRA, and also one of the lead authors of the definition, Ken Stern, who incidentally, Rob cites many examples of of the way it's been wielded to chill pro-Palestinian speech, including the cancellation of an Israel Apartheid Week in the UK, the use of it by Secretary of State Pompeo to label Amnesty International and Human Rights Watch anti-Semitic, among many others. So I don't think it's quite right to say that it hasn't been used, perhaps inappropriately, I think Scott would say, but it certainly has been used as a weapon. But what I want to say to close this is, I think from the school committee's perspective, it's really helpful to me to think about what problems endorsing it or not endorsing it could solve or not solve. We've heard a lot from the community on Israel and Gaza and how it's affected students and teachers in the community. And I boil it down to two main problems. One is we're hearing a lot about safe and the lack of safety and the lack of support students may feel in schools. Students feel vulnerable to hateful speech, or they're afraid to show their identities as a Jewish student or as a Muslim student or an Arab student. The second is that speech is chilled in the classroom. People are afraid to say the wrong thing. So when I started my own process of looking for more information about whether definitions of anti-Semitism or other kinds of hateful speech could solve these problems, I was initially very hopeful because I thought it could add some clarity to our existing policies around bullying and anti-discrimination. But I came away from it, I'll tell you, much more skeptical that these definitions would solve those specific problems, regardless of my particular politics on the IHRA definition. And I think the author put it well when he said that as a Zionist, he doesn't agree with some of the speech complained about, but it's political speech and should be answered, not suppressed or chilled. And that was his way of encapsulating the complexity of trying to define hateful speech in policies at school districts. And at the end, that's where I've landed as well. So I'm sharing this because the advocacy campaigns on both sides propelled me to try to educate myself as well. And I'm sharing this with you to let you know where I've landed. So thanks for letting me comment on this, David.
All right, I see Natalia has a comment too. Go ahead, Natalia.
I know you said last to Stephen and minus 10 seconds, just to ask you what the next step is. I think I agree strongly with Stephen, and we got a lot of emails, as well as public comment. I want to thank everybody who emailed school committee, both in support and against the definition. And so I just wanted to ask you, David, are we putting this to a close like the select board did, to say we were not going to have a definition, but we are going to pay attention and try to, ensure that there is a pathway? I hear the parents that say, how are you going to protect from, our community? So I do want to maybe at school committee as a whole that we talk about, even without a definition, who do they go to? Do they go to Claire? Like I see some parents have emailed there. Like I would like parents to know if there are concerns, who they can go to. Some parents ask for an anonymous line. So are we going to continue this conversation in a different venue? I agree with Stephen that I think definitions are not going to solve for what we're actually trying to solve for, which is fear, which is experiences that kids and families are having inside and outside of the classroom. And how do we address that? And, I agree with Stephen. I don't think definition is the way. And I think we have heard clearly today that people would take that definition in different spirit. But just, David, if you have an idea of next steps, that would be helpful.
Well, that does appear to be the direction that the joint subcommittees are going in, but we're not the full school committee. So we'll have further discussions about what we may or may not docket and how we might proceed on this. But certainly there will at minimum be further discussions around how we provide supports for all of our students, and in the context of Israel and Gaza, our Jewish students, our Muslim students, et cetera. And so there will be more discussions around that for sure. All right, so with that, we are now 45 minutes over, so we do have to call it a night. But thank you again, everyone, for coming on and participating.
I'm always available.